Okay. Good morning, or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our introducing RHEL 9 webinar. Happy to see everyone. Before we begin, I would like to take a few minutes to give you a brief overview of who we are here at Fierce and what you should expect to learn. So Fierce is a small women-owned business specializing in reselling enterprise open source software for our public sector customers with a specific focus on federal system integrators. Specific value add elements that we bring are innovation brokering, license management, professional services, formal training, and custom technology enablement workshops. Our perspective as a reseller means that we hear your goals and technology challenges, and we respond from the perspective of our portfolio and not as a single vendor solution. We love to be an innovation broker, getting our customers access to the smartest people and best technology we can find. We like to hear the entire challenge and take ownership of finding our customers a complete solution. In addition to being an innovation broker, we offer several other value adds. If you need professional services as a part of an install or ongoing access to our professional enterprise, we work with vendor professional service teams and can bundle those for you. This is both cleared and uncleared resources. We also provide access to formal training. Today we are going to be talking about Red Hat training. Red Hat training is something we have provided for some time now. Today's webinar is an example of our technology enablement webinars. We designed these as free sessions to share both best practices for implementation to your team. If you see anything that fits, we'd love to follow up with you today. If it wasn't a fit, let us know where we can fill in gaps for your specific needs. We'd love to help. You can catch our information now on the screen or at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to pass it back to Rob at Red Hat, who will be leading us in today's webinar, focusing on the RHEL 9 introduction. Rob, you can take it away.
Thanks so much. Hi, folks. My name's Rob Locke. I am a senior solution architect here at Red Hat as part of the training and certification team. You will see my cohort, Wes Urquhart, floating around in the chat window and such, as he will try to help me out with answering any questions, so I don't, completely mess me up. Anyway. I've been with Red Hat for a long time. I've been an instructor. I've actually developed the curriculum. I was an architect for the lab platform at one time, and also created exams. So done a little bit of everything over here with training and certification. Today, what we want to do is take a look at Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and more specifically, a new release that just came out this past month. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9.0. Remember, the goal of Red Hat Enterprise Linux is to provide you with flexibility, stability, and reliability as you go to support your hybrid cloud innovation. So what's the plan for today? Well, I'm going to start off by talking about some of the contexts that we put our conversations in when we talk about Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and we refer to these as the 4 pillars of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So we'll start with that, but then I'll go into some of the program updates that we have had, in addition to some of the technical features. And then, since I am part of training and certification, I wanted to take an opportunity to show you one of the newer labs that we have for the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9 courses that we have available today. So I'll show you our online environment and give you a little bit of a taste. So to start off here, the pillars of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. The goal of these pillars is to provide us with some context about how we want to talk about RHEL. The first of these pillars is this idea of innovate. How can we accelerate your innovation? Empower you to do what's needed to deploy your hybrid cloud environments. The second pillar, oops, click in the right place, is called optimize. This is to help you to streamline your IT infrastructure. As an example, I'll be talking a little bit later on about some new image builder capabilities that can be used to create that consistent, repeatable platform for your deployments of RHEL, whether they happen to be, on local hardware, whether they're virtualized in the cloud, or even at the edge of your computing environment. The third pillar is the idea of protect. How do I build a stable, consistent, and trustworthy platform? And so along those lines, we've got some enhanced user authentication capabilities. We've got new web console support for smart card authentication. We also have, little things. Disabling the root login with SSH via a password is the new default in RHEL 9. And then our final pillar is one of trust. Bottom line, Red Hat works hard each and every day to earn your trust, making sure that you can operate with that complete confidence, a reliable, long life cycle to your platform, enhanced web console performance metrics, kernel live patching so that your systems don't have to come down and reboot anymore. These are the types of things that we are enhancing in the technology. So, with the context of those pillars, let's talk a little bit about some of the program updates that we have. Now, as part of that, we have the value of the RHEL subscription. As I'm sure most of you know, Red Hat operates under a subscription model where we are looking to provide you with the support and expertise you need to manage your environment. We have the security resources, the partner ecosystem, lifecycle support and flexibility. We give you product roadmaps as to where things are going, and proactive analytics so that you know where the problems may occur, hopefully before they actually do. So let's talk a little bit about that life cycle. But before I do that, what about 8.6? As some of you may know, RHEL 9.0 was announced and released this past month. Exactly 7 days before, we released RHEL 8.6. Many of the features that you'll hear me talking about today are in both 8.6 and 9.0. And so you might be wondering, why do I want to go to 9.0? Why shouldn't I just stick with 8.6? Well, it boils down to your life cycle. Here is what both RHEL 8 and RHEL 9's lifecycle planning guide looks like. You'll see that we start with a full support part of this lifecycle that lasts for 5 years. What are we doing in that full support phase? Well, we're providing you with the critical and important Red Hat security advisories. We may even include some of the urgent and other selected ones. We will include high priority bug fix advisories and maybe even some enhancement advisories where we have added new features to the product. Now, in that 5 years of full support, what you will see is a number of minor releases. So our first 9 release is 9.0. Soon thereafter, we'll have 9.1. What's going to happen in that release? Well, we'll have additional hardware enablement as new hardware has come out during that period of time. We will probably include some enhanced software functionality, some additional things that are perhaps happening at the forefront of development tools and such. We'll talk more about developer features a little bit later on. And then with each minor release, we sort of accumulate all of the RHSAs, RHBAs, and RHEAs to release in that minor release. So, the maintenance support phase follows that full support phase. During the maintenance support phase, we will continue to provide those critical and important security advisories, and we will even do some of the urgent bug fix advisories. But during that maintenance phase, we're not doing any additional hardware enablement. You're not going to see us provide any enhanced software functionality planned for those minor releases. In fact, we don't really have minor releases during maintenance support. The minor releases basically stop at the end of the full support phase. Now, we do have some customers that need to extend this beyond 10 years, and so I'll be honest with you. If you want to give me more money, I'll take it, and I'll extend this for years 11 and 12 as an extended life cycle support. But our expectation is to sort of move forward with these things. Now, I started this off by talking about, well, what about RHEL 8.6? Well, RHEL 8 came out 3 years ago. And so where are we on this chart then? Yeah, that's right. We're 60% of the way through the full support phase. You've only got 2 years left of full support on RHEL 8. Now, it's perfectly functional. If you're deploying it on your hardware, it's still great. The maintenance support will continue to work with you. But if you're going out and buying new hardware, that sort of stuff, after the 2 more years, no more hardware enablement coming into play. Let's look at this another different way. Let me put some dates to what we're looking at with RHEL 9. So the idea of a minor release is that the minor release is going to come out about every 6 months. And so we have 9.0 that came out on May 18th. So roughly 6 months later, so let's see if I can do my math correctly, what would that be? Somewhere November-ish, we would probably see 9.1. And then next May, we may see 9.2. So we're going to see each of those minor releases about every 6 months. But notice on some of these that we have sort of these extended lines. Reality is, for you and I in an enterprise situation, we're not necessarily looking to make those more cumulative batch updates every 6 months. Sure, we'll apply security advisories on an ad hoc basis, but batching together bug fix advisories and other enhancements to the environment, we probably want to extend that a little bit. And so we've had this concept for a while, but now we're codifying it, if you will, every even release of RHEL. So that's 9.0, 9.2, 9.4, and so on, will have an extended update support path, which can allow you to lock yourself into that particular even release so that you can extend out a little bit and maybe skip the odd minor releases, and therefore you're only doing that slightly more significant update once a year, or at the outside, every 2 years. So this is the life cycle planning guide. And again, this is part of what we're looking to be able to provide to you as you go to rely on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Now, I'm hoping that most of you are already aware of the Red Hat developer subscription. We've had this for a while now. It got a lot more press when we retired CentOS as a straight distribution and have sort of shifted over to CentOS Stream as the upstream environment for RHEL to make it easier for us to interact with our partners and such on developing that next release of RHEL. The Red Hat developer subscription gives access to individuals to be able to download for free Red Hat Enterprise Linux itself and get updates. What's different about this? Well, the purpose here is this is being done for an individual, and you can use it anyhow you want. It's a single subscription for that individual using up to 16 physical or virtual nodes subscribed, connected to your subscription to be able to get their updates and additional software. The other thing here is that it's self-supported. So the extent of support for people on the developer subscription is you can send us an email and we will try to help you out a little bit through that. Now, as I mentioned, the developer subscription I was hoping most of you are already familiar with because we've had it for quite some time already. What's new and what we've just introduced this last month is the idea of Red Hat developer subscription for teams. I mean, let's be honest, a larger organization is looking to do development on RHEL directly before putting the stuff into production. Now, the caveat here is the nodes that you have in the developer subscription for teams are free as long as those nodes are for development work. They're not production. Production, you still need to do the normal subscriptions like we've always had. The beauty of this is whether you're an individual developer, whether you're an organization that has a large number of developers, you can now consistently run your environments on RHEL itself. You don't need to go off and find some alternate distribution to be able to do the work that you need to do to create the applications that are making your environment successful. And of course, all of these tie in. You can run them in the cloud. You can run them on your local hardware, whatever makes sense. All right. So that's some of the program changes that we've made. What about the platform itself? What are some of the new features and things that we've introduced? Well, as with every major RHEL release, we tend to update the kernel to the latest version. We've rebased the kernel in RHEL 9 to kernel 5.14. Now, a couple of caveats with this because we tend to get a lot of questions about it. If we're running kernel 5.14 and we get to 9.5, 9.6 of RHEL, does that mean none of the new features of the later kernels or new designs or security things that are only implemented in those later versions of the kernel? I don't get any of that? No. You will get certainly all of the security stuff, but you may, in fact, get some of those new features being backported to the 5.14 kernel. Now, a couple of features just to mention in comparing this kernel to the one that's in RHEL 8. For one thing, we have enabled WireGuard. And what does that mean to me? Well, traditionally, VPN capabilities have been done in the user space area of Linux. This tends to create some overhead and some sluggishness to the encryption and decryption. So with WireGuard, WireGuard is a lightweight service providing the VPN capabilities with much faster response times because we've tied this into the kernel itself. We've also changed some of our core scheduling capabilities. And the idea here is that the multi-threading support across CPU cores is more efficient. All right? This should improve performance, but as a side effect, it also will mitigate vulnerabilities like Spectre and Meltdown. Now, this kernel is not just a new kernel, it's also giving us support for operating on additional hardware. Most of us have been hearing in the news all of the discussions around ARM processors. In fact, Amazon has a new ARM service as part of their cloud where you and I could be implementing on those ARM processors. Well, with RHEL 9, we are now introducing full support for ARM. And as part of our support, we've also tweaked what we're supporting for AMD and Intel processors for IBM Power Systems and the IBM Z. So you can see a list of those architectures listed here. Now, before you ask, ARM for us does not mean Raspberry Pi. Okay, we do not have support with RHEL for that as a platform at the moment. All right, so, but now adding RHEL for ARM support. This introduces and makes for some interesting conversations with our customers as they look to bring RHEL out to the edge of their computing environment. When we start shifting out to the edge, we need better management tools. How do I go about performing, provisioning with zero touch? How do I ensure health checks are running across and I know what devices are happy or not? How do I roll out now that my environment has become much larger? How do I ensure that the security remediation that's needed for my platform, how do I ensure that that's gone out there? And so looking at things like CoreOS, which allows us to deploy containers out to the edge, be able to provide for better release upgrade support, the installation and onboarding. I mean, we've got it to the point now where you can create a custom boot USB image or CD that you can send out to the edge if that's your preferred approach. Now, RHEL for workstations. No, again, I've been at Red Hat a long time. This is not me standing up here and going, 2022 is the year of the desktop for Linux. No. To be honest with you, I think that ship sailed. When we're talking about RHEL for workstations, we're talking about workstations. We're talking about that professional grade hardware, those high-end applications, whether it's high performance graphics that you're doing, whether it's some of the scientific activities, or frankly, you might be Pixar and you're doing all the animation stuff. Again, with RHEL for workstation, we've ensured the hardware enablement to allow you to run those workloads. But you get the same deployment options that you get in RHEL going out to server environments. Do the same bare metal, the same virtualized, the same private cloud, the same public cloud environments. We can put that stuff out there. So again, this now means from a Linux workstation perspective, you're looking at that same 10-year life cycle. all right, and the large partner ecosystem. Now, as part of that, we have updated Gnome, the desktop environment, to be Gnome 40. Gnome 40, new interfaces, updated interfaces for us, additional configuration options being made available, and we're shifting away from the insecure X11 environment as an underlying windowing infrastructure over to Wayland by default. And we've been working on the Wayland shift for a long time through our work in Fedora. So a lot of testing and such has already been done. And we've had some interesting integration of Wayland all the way down to the kernel. Classification banners is a new feature of GNOME 40. This is important for some of the government regulations where you need to be able to put up some form of banner that can't be hidden or discarded, and it can automatically pop up at various intervals and stuff. So new feature in GNOME 40. So let's take a look at some of the technical features that have changed and been improved here. Now, when I talk about the technical features, I'm going to talk about them in the context of the pillars. So remember, our first pillar was this idea of accelerating innovation. How am I going to go about doing that? Well, we've simplified the developer experience. We've got the developer subscription for individuals. We've got a developer subscription for teams. But the reality is that doesn't necessarily help me if I need to be running the latest particular set of libraries or the latest development tool version. Of course, when we release RHEL 9, we've rebased many of those development tools. So you do have newer versions of LLVM, Rust, Go compilers. It's now GCC 11, newer version of glibc. We have finished the migration to Python 3, since Python 2 is dead and really ought to be buried at this point. And so we've got 3.9 being shipped on RHEL 9. But I think one of the more significant and interesting things is that we are redefining application streams. And we are looking at providing other ways of getting that later version of software. And so while base OS tends to be somewhat fixed and provides us with that application binary interface and the consistency to that, app streams may have different support cycles. And so you may see us, I'm not predicting per se, but you may see us release new modules under app streams that might introduce a later Python 3 version, maybe when 9.1 comes out, or maybe in between at some point. Another interesting aspect to this is the idea of code-ready Linux Builder, which can allow you and I to be, let's be honest, we ought to be building this stuff in containers, right? If we build it in containers, then those libraries and all of those elements are not affected by, nor do they rely on what's running on the underlying host operating system. So code-ready Linux Builder can help you with that. And RHEL 9 is the first version that is actually based on CentOS streams as an upstream project. And through CentOS streams, we were able to better work with those hardware partners and other software partners to provide a better experience and better feedback to create a more solid release. I mentioned developers for individuals, developers for teams. Here's the URL, developers.redhat.com. We have completely redesigned that interface. Not only does it give you the ability to download RHEL, but it also gives you a ton of knowledge and articles and things to read about, to learn about Red Hat Enterprise Linux and the various tool chains that are there. So the complete redesign of developers.redhat.com should hopefully make it easier for you to innovate and learn about what's there. Of course, with RHEL 9, we have updated to a later version of Podman. Podman 4.0 includes DNS name resolution and improved IPv6 support, such that dual stack support is there. Now, I have to admit, this might be a little disingenuous because dual stack support is now the default in Podman 4.0, but we at Red Hat, we turned that puppy on a couple of versions ago. So, but now the upstream community and us, we're in sync, and the dual stack support is there. We've also discovered and learned a bunch of things from you, our users, about our universal base images, and we have been tuning those to be able to provide universal base images of sizes ranging from as small as 7.5 meg for a little tiny init image up to a more traditional standard image of about 80 meg. We've also enabled C Group 2 by default. C Group 2 is what allows us, or C Group in general, is what allows us to control resource utilization of our containers on the system. And when C Group version 1 originally came out, we had some core things that were defined, but it was, I'll be honest with you, a little bit of the Wild West in terms of extending that beyond. So with C Group 2, we have now really come up with some better definitions of being able to manage those resources and have those process definitions. So we should see better controls being available and more consistent controls. All right, so that was the first of the pillars. The next one I want to talk to you about is optimize. Now, with optimize, we're talking about wanting to be able to put together that consistent delivery. You know, what's the big phrase now? Reduce toil. All right, so we want to be able to eliminate some of those redundant tasks that we're all doing. And so what I want to do is take an opportunity to introduce you to Red Hat Enterprise Linux Image Builder Service. Now, we've had Image Builder, but in order for you to create images, you needed to create a build infrastructure to go ahead and define and create those images in a consistent way. Now, you can use the Image Builder service, all right, through our website and build cloud images, your own customized gold images that you may want to roll out within your environment. So as sort of an example of this, here's a screenshot of Image Builder running in a local infrastructure. But the concept is you're defining what you want to go ahead and build. What's your target platform? You know, am I building this image to deploy on AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure? Or, as is checked here, I'm building it for virtualization as a local libvirt-based guest image. We also support bare metal deployments now. You can install that customized RHEL OS image directly out to that physical hardware. You can build, as I mentioned earlier, that custom installation media that you can put out there, which will put the appropriate kickstart in and automate the whole process for you. We now even have better file system support than we had in earlier versions. This will allow you to be able to define non-LVM file system mount points and multiple mount points rather than just the big massive root file system that we had assumed earlier on. So conceptually, for trying to optimize this process, what's the flow? Well, you choose the platform, what you're wanting to have this image ultimately go to, whether it's physical, private cloud, public cloud, or out to the edge. Then, have you created the infrastructure for building on your own, at which point you can point to the image builder tool of an on-premise private build, or you can go to console.redhat.com. You'll define in the tool the blueprint, what are the elements we want in this image. Click go, it'll create the images that you've requested. And then, of course, the final thing is we push the image to its intended target. So the idea of optimize. Now, what about protect? Well, again, this is where I'm concerned about security and such. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, we've enhanced the SSSD logging. For those of you working with SE Linux, we've made some adjustments there that have improved the performance. I mentioned the root login for SSH disabled by default. Well, what we actually did there is we disabled by default root login with a password. So if you've deployed keys on the system, you can still get in directly as root. Probably not the best choice, but you can still do that. We're not negating that out of the box. But what this also means is that we've added some additional parameters that we can put into the SSHD config file to configure what sort of SSH connections we want to be able to connect with. Now, one of the things I will warn you about, though, that we are starting to see is as we get a wider set of versions of RHEL, and we are realizing that some of the encryption algorithms that we have used historically are not necessarily as secure as perhaps we originally thought. And so we're starting to disable some of those cryptography protocols on our systems. What does that mean to you and I in a practical sense? Well, I talked about keys with SSH. If you have some very old keys that you built back on, I don't know, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 4, and you didn't pick one of the more advanced keys, you took the simplest key that they had, perhaps it was SHA-1, well, that key's not going to work when you try to SSH into a RHEL 9 system. So some of our back and forth has been a little problematic, again, from the far apart versions. But this is being done to make your system more hardened by default. Already talked about C Group 2, which should create a better security environment for our containers. In terms of compliance, so the various profiles and security committees out there that have come up with ways in which to measure and decide whether or not the platform meets their requirements. We, of course, continue to work with those agencies and continue to comply with that. Again, doing that on your behalf. All right, our final pillar, one of trust. As I mentioned, we're working each and every day to make it better for you to trust RHEL as the platform to build your hybrid cloud infrastructure. And so we are introducing new system roles. You are seeing us incorporate some of our automation capabilities with Ansible in here as system roles to, again, create that consistent deployment so that the web console that's available is configured the same across my systems, that the HA cluster, high availability clustering suite, is functioning consistently across them. All of that through those system roles. Speaking of high availability, though, we've made some more improvements there. We have some additional fencing agents. Remember, the idea of a fencing agent in a cluster is if the health check of a particular node within that cluster is deemed unhealthy, we can fence off that node by powering it off. And so fencing agents tend to tie directly into power capabilities. We also have the cluster system roles. Again, those system roles we were just talking about. But one area that I'm wondering if some of you have had a chance to start to play with a little bit is we introduced in RHEL 8 this idea of a web console. Well, we've been making ongoing improvements throughout the various point releases of 8, and that continues on into 9. Kernel live patching management done through this web console. The upstream project is called Cockpit, and so that's the name of the service that you look to enable. You'll need to poke an appropriate hole for if you're running a local firewall. But lots more performance metrics being made available with this web console. But one of the more interesting things for me is I'm a heavy user of virtual machines directly on a RHEL box. And I have, to be honest with you, used some of the graphical libvirt-based tools that we've had over the years. Well, one of those tools is being declared deprecated. Still there for the moment, but they're basically putting me on notice to tell me that Virt Manager is going to go away, with the intent being that we're going to use the web console to be able to bring up control of the virtual machines on that particular host. By the way, web console, perfectly happy working from a mobile device. Through that device web browser, you get that alert and you want to go in and quickly check some things while you're on the 7th tee. You can check the logs, monitor that system health. You can even troubleshoot and resolve issues that are in there, whether you're on the 7th tee or sitting in a movie theater watching the latest release of Fast and Furious. Performance Copilot has been improved here with RHEL 9. This is what's providing us with a lot more performance metrics. And so being able to get this kind of information about loads and what's running on my systems and where are my bottlenecks. The improved scalability of PCP that we're talking about here was a rewrite of some elements so that it has less of an impact on that running host. Because one of the things that's always been a concern is when you start measuring performance, well, there's some overhead to measuring that performance. So much better memory allocation across the platforms for being able to do this. And the metrics are shown to me through the web console. Now, as we're talking about metrics, there's another area that I'd like to make mention of. Red Hat Insights. I don't know if any of you are using this much at this stage, but this is sort of the new overview of your subscriptions, being able to go in and find out how the resources are doing, whether or not they're compliant. One of the challenges has always been knowing which systems have the requisite security patches having been applied. In fact, we can configure Red Hat Insights to alert us based upon a baseline that we've established in there. Red Hat Satellite, I'm happy to mention, will have full support for RHEL 9 in the 6.11 release that's coming shortly. Nothing you have to do particularly to support those RHEL 9 systems. You just have to register them to that satellite server. All right, so let's take a few moments to sort of see for ourselves. As I've mentioned, Red Hat training and certification, from the day we announced RHEL 9, within a week, we had released updates to RH124, RH134, and the EX200 exam for Red Hat certified system administrators. This allows folks to go through and practice their skills with RHEL 9. We also have the RHCSA Rapid Track course, which takes the 10 days of training that are in 124 and 134, condenses them down to 5. How's that possible? Well, it's not fluff that we're removing. What we're doing is making a whole lot of assumptions about you showing up at that RH199. The fact that you are perhaps already certified and you're looking to update your certification, or you've got 10 years of Linux system administration expertise, but perhaps you were doing it with Debian or Ubuntu, and you want to shift your skill set over to Red Hat. And so that's the sort of profile of the person we're looking for RH199. Otherwise, 124 and 134 will step you through those elements and prepare you for the exam. We do have sort of the next course in the engineer curriculum that is currently in development, and that is RH294, the Red Hat Enterprise Linux Automation with Ansible. That likewise will be updated in the coming months to RHEL 9. The interesting thing there is that we need to make some Ansible shifts in addition to RHEL shifts. We have, since 294 first came out, introduced Ansible Automation Platform 2. And so the update to this course will have us moving over to those Ansible execution environments and the use of Ansible Navigator to go through and build our playbooks and such, as opposed to the old Ansible engine, which is what the current version 8 of that course operates on. So let me show you a little bit about what these courses ultimately look like. So if I come over here, I am in what we call roll.redhat.com. This is where we offer self-paced access to our courses. We also offer it in the form of a Red Hat Learning subscription, where you can go through and gain access for a period of 12 months to the entire portfolio of courses. And so I thought I would just bring up the first of the courses, RH124, because there's a section in here that I'm particularly curious about how many of you are comfortable with this if you've been using earlier versions of RHEL, because some significant things are happening around networking with RHEL 9. Specifically, the network configuration files changed. Many of you may be familiar with the IFCFG files. Yeah, bye-bye. All right, you can use those if it's an upgrade situation. So RHEL 9 will read those files, but if you're looking to make changes, if you're looking to deploying new interfaces, that sort of stuff, we really need to be moving over to Network Manager's NM connection files. And so if I go to the section here about editing network configuration files, we discover that these configuration files are found in Etsy Network Manager System Connections directory, that these files follow a sort of key file format. They look like INI files from back in the day. And so these NM connection files, what we have is a little table here talking about the NMCLI con mod commands that we've done in previous sections of this chapter, what it would look like in the corresponding NM connection file. And so in learning about that configuration format, we then learn that we can go into this directory, we can make changes to those files, understand that those files and how they're stored are in different directories, Etsy, run, and user. And the difference between those directories, I'll leave to you to find as you go to take a course like this. But here's an example configuration file. The general configuration information up top, the IPv4 information, we say method equals auto. Well, this means that it's going to use DHCP. But if I wanted static, we're offering you a reminder of what you'd need to put in. You need to put in an address line, a gateway line, and a DNS line. Those NM connection files need to have certain permissions and ownership. And then after editing the file, there's a good chance Network Manager is not going to notice the new information. So we have to tell it that we've updated the files. We can do an NMCLI con reload, and if it's not set to auto connect, we can con up that particular device. So after learning about this and some references to where you can see this in the documentation, it then brings us to a guided exercise. And in that guided exercise, it goes through and steps us through making those changes. And so up top here, there's lab environment, where I see I've got a bunch of virtual machines that are running for me. I had created and launched these before we started. But come back to the course, and I had already done Open Console on the workstation VM. And this is the machine that we tend to do most of our operational stuff from. And so the first command it tells me that I need to do is a lab start net edit. We have these lab scripts that will set up your environment in support of the tasks we're looking to have you do. So lab start net-edit. It checks that the lab systems are all up currently. And then since apparently we're going to be making networking configuration changes to server A and server B, it's backing up those networking configurations just to protect us. All right, so what's next? Well, from the workstation machine, they want me to SSH into server A. And from there, I'm going to look at finding my network connections. All right, so let me come over here. I will SSH student at server A. It has let me in. We've got keys already set up, so it's not prompting me for a password or anything. Then they wanted me to look at, well, what devices do I have for networking? And as I do an IP link command, it shows me that my interface is called ETH0. There are some alternate names, ENP0S3 and ENS3, depending upon nomenclature of different versions. We have the predictive device naming support continues to be available here in RHEL 9. So I found the device. Let's see what connections are active. All right, so NMCLI con show, active. And I see I've got a connection that's named wired connection 1. and it's linked to device over here on the right, ETH0. Well, let's look in system connections directory, and there I see the wired connection 1 NM connection. Well, in order to edit that, I have to sort of escalate my privileges. What they want me to do is to edit it and add a second IP address. So, sudo -I, and I will edit that file. And as I look down here, I see that the address 1 is already there, DNS is there. It wants me to add a second address, so I'm going to open up a line here, and it's going to be address 2 equals, and then let's see, what was the address they wanted me to set? They wanted me to call it 10.0.11/24. All right, so 10.0.1.1/24. I'll go ahead and save the file. Now, let me just double check, do an IPA, and I see here that I only have one IP address associated with ETH0. Let me do an nmcli con reload and a nmcli con up wired connection 1. Now, if I do an IPA, you see that I now have both IP addresses. Now, the exercise doesn't really stop there. It then has me continuing on after upping it, seeing that the address is there. It then wants me to go over to server B, set a corresponding secondary address, and then prove that we can have communication going over that network. So those are the types of things that we do in our classroom environments and in our labs. So these happen to come, if you're looking this up later on, this is from chapter 12 of RH 124 and was from sections 12.7 and 12.8. So what did we discuss today? We talked about the 4 pillars of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We saw some of the program updates that we've been making to RHEL, including things like developer subscriptions, and other things for us, some of the technical features that have changed with our system, and you've also seen for yourself how you can be experimenting with this stuff, either by taking one of our classes or, frankly, logging into developers.redhat.com and downloading RHEL and beginning to play with it yourself. So, questions? Wes, do we have any questions?
Thanks, Rob. Nice job. No, there were a couple, but it seems like we've kind of gone through them in Q&A here. Mostly logistical around, pricing for RHLS, believe it or not. So a way to get RHLS up on the screen there, and a copy of the recording. So both those were answered. But we got a couple minutes, so we can just kind of filibuster for a second, see if any other questions come in. Otherwise, we can pass it back to Olivia. Or I'm sorry, not Olivia. Colleen. I was seeing Olivia's name in the chat window. She was answering questions. My mistake.
It's okay. Well, like you said, thank you so much for everyone coming. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask, or you can send an email to redhat@fiercesoftware.com. We'd be happy to answer those questions for you. So please feel free to contact me for all your training needs with the information on the screen. In addition to any training questions, please give feedback on what you liked about the webinar or we can improve on for next time. You will be receiving an email from myself with the recording, and then you can get my contact information if you didn't write it down. So that's all from me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it back to Rob if there's any other final thoughts.
No, that pretty much does it. We've got lots of stuff available through YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, feeds for us from Red Hat. we invite you to get connected with us too. So I appreciate everyone being here today.
Awesome. So at this point, I'm going to stop the recording.